You're living your life, everything's going just fine. And then one day, out of nowhere, you find out your wife has been secretly seeing not one, not two, but 4 other men. But here's the crazy part. This isn't just about cheating. Oh no, it gets way darker. She doesn't just want revenge, she wants control. And she drags her lovers into this twisted plot to completely break her husband. Days of unthinkable brutality, psychological games, and pure manipulation follow. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, but trust me, this is real. And here's the thing. You won't believe the lengths she went to. The twists, the turns, the shocking moments, each one more insane than the last. Stick around, because this story, it's going to leave you speechless. You do not want to miss what happens next. Let's begin with Maria, the woman at the center of this twisted tale. At first glance, Maria seemed like the picture of a loving wife. She was charming, beautiful, and the type of woman who could light up any room. David, her husband, thought he had everything he could ever ask for, until the truth started to unravel. He worked long hours, trying to provide for his family, and at home, Maria was the perfect partner, or so he thought. They had 2 children, a comfortable home, and a seemingly stable life. But underneath that picture-perfect exterior, there was a brewing storm. Maria's dissatisfaction with her marriage wasn't something David noticed at first. She was always smiling, always talking about the future, and yet, behind closed doors, she started seeking something else. It wasn't just an emotional void, it was a hunger for something darker. Soon, she wasn't just talking about improving her life, she was living a double life. Maria found herself caught in a web of affairs, and it wasn't just one lover. No, Maria had 4 men, each playing a different role in her world, each contributing to her twisted sense of power. First, there was Mark, an old high school flame who she reconnected with. He was wild, impulsive, and had a certain rawness that Maria craved. Then there was Tom, a colleague of David's, a smooth talker who always knew the right things to say to make Maria feel wanted. Next came Chris, a former lover who Maria had secretly never let go of. And finally, Eric, a younger man, someone who Maria had taken under her wing, someone who idolized her and would do anything she asked. Each man was a piece of the puzzle, fulfilling a part of her needs in ways David never could. And then, of course, there was David, the husband who had no idea. He was hardworking, reliable, and trusted his wife implicitly. But as his wife's affairs grew, so did her desire for something more, something darker. David's ignorance would soon come to a crushing end, and the life he thought he was building would come crashing down. Now, we have to understand that all of this didn't happen in a vacuum. The environment they lived in, suburbia, a quiet town where everyone knew everyone else, created the perfect backdrop for this deception. The perfect setting for Maria to keep her secrets hidden, to juggle multiple lovers while maintaining the appearance of a perfect wife and mother. It all started one late afternoon, a moment that would haunt David for the rest of his life. He came home early from work, nothing out of the ordinary, or so he thought. As he opened the door to their house, the first thing that struck him was an unusual silence. There was no sound of Maria bustling in the kitchen, no laughter from their kids running around. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. David walked through the living room, still unaware of the storm brewing behind closed doors. He called out, "Maria?" But there was no answer. The only sound that broke the silence was the faint sound of muffled voices coming from upstairs. David's curiosity led him up the stairs, toward their bedroom. He didn't think anything of it at first. Maybe Maria was on the phone or talking to one of her friends. But as he approached the bedroom door, the sounds became clearer, more intimate, and that's when his heart sank. Maria wasn't alone, not in the way he had ever imagined. It wasn't a phone call. It was something much worse. He pushed the door open slowly, heart racing, expecting to see nothing more than a casual conversation. What he saw instead shattered his world. There, in their bed, was Maria, and not just any man. It was Tom, the very same colleague he'd worked alongside for years. David stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the two of them. There was no denying it now. His worst fear was right in front of him. Maria was having an affair. But this wasn't just about a betrayal. It was the way she looked at Tom, the way she didn't even try to hide what was happening. No shame, no apology. For a moment, time stood still. David didn't know whether to scream, to cry, or to run away from the nightmare that had just become his reality. But Maria didn't even flinch. She casually glanced at him, a flicker of something almost like amusement crossing her face. Then, in a calm voice, she said, "David, I think it's time we talk about our marriage." Those words, so simple and calm, made David feel like the world had tilted beneath him. He was no longer the man in control of his life. Maria had taken that away long ago, and now it was clear. She was done pretending. But it wasn't just the affair that rattled David. It was the coldness, the total lack of regret in Maria's voice. This wasn't some fleeting moment of weakness. No, Maria's actions were deliberate. She'd planned this for months, and it was only the beginning of what would become a twisted game of manipulation and cruelty. David's heart sank as he realized the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just about cheating. It was about power, control, and a complete dismantling of everything he thought he knew about his wife. This was just the beginning. Once the affair was exposed, Maria didn't just leave things to unravel on their own. No, she had a plan. A plan so carefully crafted, it was almost as if she had rehearsed it in her mind for years. This wasn't about just humiliating David. It was about total domination. Maria knew she had power over David's life, but it wasn't enough. She needed control, absolute control, and she wasn't going to stop until she had it. The first step of the plan was simple: break David down mentally. She knew that the affair had already shaken him to his core, but that wasn't enough to make him truly vulnerable. He had to be completely helpless, physically and emotionally. So, Maria started weaving her web of manipulation. She made sure that David knew about each lover, dropping hints and details in conversations that played with his mind. "I'm happier than I've ever been, David," she'd say casually. "Maybe it's because I don't feel so alone anymore." Those words, laced with contempt, were enough to stir a storm in David's heart. It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the way Maria made him feel inferior. She didn't need to shout at him or attack him. Her words alone were enough to send him spiraling into confusion and self-doubt. But it didn't end there. Maria knew that she couldn't do this alone. She couldn't break David without help. So she reached out to her lovers, each of them for a specific purpose. Mark, the high school flame, had always been the bold one. He was the one who would do whatever Maria asked, without question. She brought him into the plan to serve as a constant presence in David's life, someone who would make sure he was always watching. Mark would show up at odd times, sometimes just to sit across from David in a cafe or bar, a reminder that he was no longer the one in control of his life. Then there was Tom, the smooth-talking colleague. Tom was the manipulator, the one who could twist David's reality in subtle ways. He'd drop little comments, things like, "Maria never seemed like the type to settle down. It's a wonder she stayed with you as long as she did." Each word planted a seed of doubt in David's mind, eating away at his sense of self-worth. Tom wasn't just helping Maria with her plan. He was actively contributing to David's emotional disintegration. Chris, the old lover Maria could never truly let go of, was brought in to add an air of danger. Maria knew that Chris was someone David feared, and she knew that by involving him, she could make David feel physically threatened. Chris wasn't the kind of man who would hesitate to intimidate someone if it meant getting what Maria wanted. His mere presence made David feel small, and Maria knew that fear was a powerful tool. Finally, there was Eric, the young, impressionable man who Maria had taken under her wing. Eric was the one Maria could manipulate the easiest. She didn't need to give him much. Just a few kind words here, a little praise there. She told him that David was weak, that he didn't deserve her. Eric believed her every word. He became a loyal follower, willing to do anything Maria asked of him. Together, these four men formed the backbone of Maria's plan. They weren't just lovers, they were pawns in a much larger game, each one playing their part in a psychological strategy designed to break David. Maria controlled them all, using a mix of affection, manipulation, and fear to get them to do her bidding. She had made them feel indispensable, and in turn, they felt compelled to follow her every command. As the plan unfolded, Maria made sure to tighten her grip. David, already reeling from the affair, didn't stand a chance. The more he tried to fight back, the more isolated he became. The men in his life were now working against him, not just by being with his wife, but by playing mental and emotional games with him at every turn. Each time he tried to escape, another layer of Maria's control would snap back into place. She had him right where she wanted him, and she wasn't about to let go. The first day was almost a blur for David. He woke up in a haze, the faint smell of something off in the air. The house felt different, empty, oppressive. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened, but the echoes of Maria's cold words the day before still rang in his ears. He was trapped in his own home, and there was no escape. He could feel it, the weight of the situation, how everything had changed. Maria had already planned the first step of her strategy. She didn't need to physically hurt David at first. No, the psychological games were far more effective. That evening, Mark showed up at the house, uninvited. David tried to confront him, demand to know why he was there, but Mark wasn't the type to back down. He just smiled that confident, mocking smile. "She's happier with me, man," he said with an easy grin, almost like he was enjoying David's torment. Mark didn't just sit there. He subtly made David feel like less than a man, sitting in his own home, undermining him at every turn. By the time he left, David felt like a stranger in his own life, like a ghost in a world he no longer understood. The next day, it was Tom's turn. This time, it was more direct. Tom had always been the smooth talker, the one who could twist words, play with David's mind. He showed up unannounced, walking into the living room as if he owned the place. "You know," Tom began, his voice casual but sharp, "Maria told me she felt like she wasted her years with you. She thinks you were never enough." The words stung, each one more venomous than the last. Tom's presence was like a pressure building in David's chest, suffocating him. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was the way these men, these strangers, had invaded his life, playing with his thoughts and emotions, chipping away at his sense of self-worth. By the third day, David was no longer fighting back. He was a shadow of the man he once was. His body ached from the lack of sleep, from the constant stress. Every time he walked through the house, it felt as if the walls were closing in on him. And that's when Chris showed up. The intensity of Chris's presence alone was enough to make David's blood run cold. He had no intention of talking or taunting. Chris's role was physical intimidation. He stood in front of David, towering over him, staring down at him with that unsettling intensity. There was no explanation. No words were necessary. Chris's presence alone was enough to remind David that he was powerless. Maria knew what she was doing. As the days went on, The situation escalated. Eric, the youngest lover, was next. He wasn't as physically imposing as Chris, but his role was just as effective. Maria had molded him into her loyal follower, and now Eric was used to manipulate David further. She told him that David was weak, that he couldn't protect his own family. Eric would taunt David, making sure he felt worthless and small, like a failure of a man. There was nowhere he could turn to for relief, no safe corner left. The whole house was a prison. Day after day, David was subjected to this cycle, each lover playing their part, each one contributing to his mental and emotional breakdown. At night, he'd lay in his bed, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't think straight. He had no one to turn to, no one to help him. The torment wasn't just about physical pain anymore. It was about the relentless mental torture, the sense of helplessness that clung to him like a second skin. Every minute, every hour felt like a year. He was slowly losing himself, and Maria was watching it all unfold, her control tightening with every passing second. By the end of the week, David was a shell of the man he once was. His thoughts were scattered, his body drained. The once confident, strong man had become a broken figure, walking through life like a zombie, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. He had been utterly defeated, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Maria had won, but the toll it took on David was beyond anything he could have imagined. After days of unrelenting psychological and physical abuse, David had finally hit rock bottom. His mind was a blur, clouded by confusion, fear, and pain. He could no longer recognize the man who walked through the door just a week ago. The emotional and physical torment had drained him, leaving him feeling like a shell of his former self. But something within him stirred. Maybe it was the deep, burning need to survive, or perhaps just the desperation of knowing that if he didn't act soon, he might never escape. David couldn't continue like this. He was trapped in a nightmare, and it had to end. It all began to unravel when Eric, the youngest of Maria's lovers, made a mistake. He wasn't as careful as the others. On the 6th day of the torture, as David was stumbling through the house, barely able to stay on his feet, he overheard a conversation between Maria and Eric. They were talking, not realizing David was in earshot, and what they said made his blood run cold. "He's breaking, Maria," Eric said, his voice uncertain. "I don't think he's going to last much longer. We might have pushed him too far." Maria's response was chilling, almost casual. "Good, that's the point. He needs to know who's in control." But David heard enough. For the first time, he realized that everything, the pain, the humiliation, the constant mental torture, was all part of a sick game for Maria. She was enjoying this. She wasn't just trying to break him physically, she was trying to destroy him emotionally. And in that moment, something inside David snapped. The fog that had clouded his mind began to lift, and he saw his situation for what it truly was. He wasn't just a victim. He was a pawn in Maria's twisted power play. But how could he escape? How could he get out of this nightmare when every door was locked, both literally and figuratively? The answer came when David made an unlikely decision. He would no longer be passive. If Maria and her lovers were going to push him to the edge, he would fight back in any way he could. The turning point came when he made contact with a neighbor. It wasn't much, just a quick text, a plea for help. The neighbor, confused at first, hesitated. But when they saw the signs of distress, they called the police, sensing something wasn't right. When the authorities arrived, it was clear that Maria's control over David was finally being challenged. The police took action, removing him from the house, though not without a fight. Maria, furious and cold, tried to downplay everything, but her mask was slipping. Her facade of the perfect wife shattered under the weight of her actions. The lovers scattered, Each of them tried to cover their tracks, some denying their involvement, others too afraid to face the truth. As for David, it wasn't an instant fix. The trauma, both physical and psychological, would haunt him for years. He was taken to a hospital where he received medical care for his injuries, but the emotional scars were far deeper. He had been betrayed by the one person he trusted the most, the woman who was supposed to love him. But even as he faced a long road to recovery, one thing was certain: he had survived. He had escaped the nightmare that Maria had created, and no matter how long it took, he would reclaim his life. Maria, on the other hand, didn't fare as well. The police investigation led to criminal charges. Though she tried to manipulate the situation in her favor, there was no denying what had happened. The truth had come out, and the cold, calculated woman who had controlled and tormented her husband and lovers was finally forced to face the consequences of her actions. But justice, it seemed, was a long and drawn-out process. The legal system moved slowly, and while Maria was arrested, it was unclear whether she would ever truly be held accountable for the psychological devastation she had caused. As for the lovers, they each went their separate ways. Some faced minor consequences for their involvement, but none of them truly paid the price for what they had done. The betrayal they had played a part in would linger in their lives, but it wasn't the kind of consequence that would change them. The damage was already done. David's story didn't end with a happy conclusion, but it did end with a glimmer of hope. He was free from the torment, free from the grip of his wife's cruel manipulation. The recovery process would be slow, but for the first time in days, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: a sense of control over his own fate. Maria's reign of terror had come to an end, but the scars she left behind were not easily erased. This was a story of abuse, control, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. But for David, it was also the story of survival. So what do you think? After everything David went through, after being trapped in that nightmare, was there any justification for Maria's actions? Could anyone really justify what she did to him? Or was this all just a twisted power play, a game of control that went too far? It's hard to imagine a life so broken, so manipulated, that it leaves someone unrecognizable, both physically and emotionally. And it raises a difficult question: how far can someone go before they lose their humanity? The truth is, there are no easy answers here. What Maria did wasn't just about revenge. It was about something darker, something that goes beyond just an affair. It was about stripping someone of their very soul, their sense of self-worth. And while David was able to escape, not everyone has that same opportunity. We've all heard of situations where abuse, whether physical or emotional, continues unnoticed. And that's why these stories are so important: to shine a light on the dark, twisted things that often go unspoken, even when they happen behind closed doors. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in David's position? Could you have stayed calm and gotten out? Or would you have been caught in that same web of manipulation? Drop your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I'm really curious to see what you think about this story. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you found this story shocking, there's more where that came from. We'll be covering more true crime cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious. We'll see you again soon here on Unsolved Case Vault.